that imperial measures can be used indefinitely alongside their metric equivalents. John Kay has the story.
All right, can I get a pound of tomatoes, please?
And a pound of tomatoes, it can stay. Imperial measures were supposed to have gone by 2009, but now the European Commission has backtracked. This greengrocer's in Bristol has always risked prosecution by refusing to sell in kilos. For them, today marks a famous victory.
99% of the customers who come in the shop ask for pounds and ounces. They don't ask for kilos. A few of the younger ones do, but generally speaking, no.
So you're a happy man?
Very. Yeah, absolutely.
It was the case of Sunderland grocer Steve Thoburn that inspired the so-called metric martyr movement. In 2001, he was convicted of selling produce by the pound and not advertising kilos. He died later of a massive heart attack.
Well, obviously, we're delighted with the news, and it's a fantastic victory for people power, but tinged with sadness because the guy who drew the line in the sand, which was Steve, is no longer with us.
They're happy too at this timber yard, where customers have never got used to metres and centimetres.
The old boys come in, they're still working in feet and inches. In fact, just yesterday, I did an inquiry and the chap was American, and Americans work in feet and inches.
But while staff are pleased they can keep their imperial measures, they admit having two systems may just prolong the confusion.
For example, if you come in here wanting a piece of 6x2 timber, what you get will depend on where that wood comes from. Let me explain. This piece comes from Britain and it comes in at exactly the traditional 6 inches in width. This piece next to it looks the same, but it's come from the continent and it's been standardised to 145 mil, which is just under the 6 inches.
So it seems tradition and confusion will remain. John Kay, BBC News, Bristol.
Warwick Cairns is on the National Committee for British Weights and Measures Association and has written a book all about this issue. A big book, I imagine, because it's all very complicated and it's pretty confusing. I mean, why not be done with imperial and just get on with metric?
I think what people like to do is use the measures they find most convenient. You know, metric system is brilliant for some things, for calculation, for science, it's excellent. But there's no substitute really for having a measure about as long as your foot. And if you're a builder on a building site, it's the easiest thing to do is not get a measure, actually pace the thing out with your feet and work out how big it is. And most of us are happy to use both.
But it does get pretty confusing. I mean, old cookery books, for example, you take to the supermarket and suddenly you find you've got the wrong measurements. Yeah. People are confused by it, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the markets will decide. If people find one thing bad, or if people don't like using furlongs, then they won't use furlongs. And if people find pounds and ounces useful, then they'll use them. And I think that, you know, if people are free to do what they find easiest and most convenient, the world will sort itself out.
It's a great victory, isn't it, for the metric martyrs?
It is. I mean, it's not completely in the bag yet. It's got to go through the Council of Ministers. It's got to go through the European Parliament. But in as far as it goes, it's a good thing. I mean, if it hadn't have gone through, in about a year or two's time, if I sold you 450 grams of apples and then told you it was £1, I'd be committing a criminal offence. I'd be fined £2,000, which is a bit mad, really.
I suppose in the long term, I mean, children nowadays in schools are taught the metric system, aren't they? So in the long term, it's almost going to die out, isn't it?
It's funny because I was taught the metric system at school as well.
And what do you use now?
I use a bit of both. And I think actually, most people use a bit of both, really, don't they? And I think that there is no substitute for the natural proportions of your body, which most countries throughout the world have measures that relate to your body. You know, the French have a pouce, which is an inch, which is your thumb.
Absolutely. Warwick Cairns, thank you very much for coming in. Now, the time is nearly 1:20.